we present Beowulf, an original adaptation, written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Part 6. Homecoming.
"You have a good cloak?" his mother asked. "You know, I have sailed forth a great many times, mother," Beowulf replied. "I have remembered the lessons you taught me, and I've no mind to forget them." "Yes," Birgitta replied, "but a good cloak is the difference between bad weather and death," he finished. "As I say, I've not forgotten the lessons you taught." He embraced her kindly, gently, where she had once seemed so large that she might encompass the whole world. Now she barely reached above his chest, and he wondered if it was just him having grown, or if she was beginning to shrink. Still, she preened over him like he was still the child she remembered, and Beowulf did not begrudge her the care that she still wished to show. "Then let me teach you another lesson," his mother went on, that note of iron resolve entering her tone. "When we sailed away from Daneland, you were a boy." "Not quite a boy," Beowulf interjected. "You were a boy," his mother continued, "with a boy's understanding of the world. You saw Hrothgar as a kindly old man who brought you under his wing, and the court of the Danes as your personal playground. Now you must see it with the eyes of a man." "And how must those eyes differ?" Beowulf asked. "Was Hrothgar not a kindly man?" "Indeed he was," his mother went on, "but not just that. Understand, Beowulf, I am the daughter of a king, the sister of a king, and your father, may he rest well, often started fires with lords and kings that called on my far cooler head to extinguish. I have seen good rulers and bad. Hrothgar is a good one, and a good man at heart. But he is a gift-giving king, and that comes with difficulties." "Difficulties?" Beowulf asked. He did not enjoy the murky waters of politics, but his mother navigated them like an expert oarsman, so he was determined to listen. "Do not all kings give gifts?" "All kings give gifts," his mother agreed, "but not all kings are gift-givers. Any king gives gifts where work is to be rewarded. That is the right and proper nature of things. But a gift-giving king wields his power through the gifts he gives, and the gifts he does not give. In all the time we were in Hrothgar's realm, he was careful never to raise your father in status beyond his works. He could be given the status of guest, and beyond that, he had to earn his place through his own actions. Hrothgar could never appoint him above a Dane, or the careful balance of power in his court would shift." "I remember him saying something like this to me," Beowulf replied, as he recalled the old man explaining why it was best they leave the Danelands. "But I do not understand fully. If a king wishes to raise a man up, well, who can disagree with him? He is the king." "Anyone," his mother replied with ice in her voice. "Anyone may disagree, and many frequently will. This is where you must view these things as a grown man. Think back to Hrothgar's court. Is he a warrior king? Do you think he would best a man in battle? Oh, I hear he was a capable spearman in his youth, but no fated warrior. Now, a warrior king, like my brother, if a man challenges him, then he will likely take the challenge himself, and sit on the man's head until his objections cease one way or the other. Can you see Hrothgar doing that?" "So he has a young warrior fight in his place," Beowulf objected. "No one would expect an old man to fight a young warrior." "Yes," his mother agreed, "but warriors respect warriors. Let's say the finest of Hrothgar's men objects to his actions and Hrothgar refuses him. How many times can Hrothgar afford to do that before this warrior turns sour and turns others around him to his way of thinking?" Beowulf thought on that for a moment. This was something he hadn't considered before, but now he did. He saw it made sense. "Perhaps twice," he supposed. "Maybe 3 times?" "If he is lucky," his mother confirmed. So you see now that a gift-giving king walks a careful line. Every action they take must be in balance. So when you go there with your offer of help, do not be surprised if your arrival is not always well received, or your actions are not always greeted with the praise you may imagine. So what is the good in a gift-giving king then? Beowulf asked, if they wield no strength of their own. The good in them? His mother asked, incredulous. My oversized ogre of a son, stop thinking with your muscles for a moment. A gift-giving king, at least a good one, can wield great strength, the strength of his whole clan. If he keeps the balance right, he can keep his whole people together to build strength that will last generations. That is what Hrothgar seeks to do. There is a reason gift-giving kings live to be old. At the mention of living to be old, her voice softened, and she reached up to pull his head down and kiss his forehead. Now go safely, and return to me whole. And remember you are a guest in Hrothgar's court, but you have a lord you serve back here. Your victories are his victories, and your errors are his errors. So try to have more of the victories than the errors. She turned to leave, and then turned back, a new thought coming to her mind. You might also do well to remember that they still call you Dane lover here, and the king seats you in the middle of his table for all your battle prowess. I do not care for politics, he began to say, but his mother cut him off. A warrior like you, the king's nephew no less, should be seated at the head of the table in a place of honour. The Geats do not fully trust that you are one of them, though, and until they do, you will always be kept further down that hall. If you can bring back some Daneland gold and glory to share with your king, though, well, he may be inclined to think of you as more than just a warrior. I know you do not care for politics, she smiled wryly, but I shall not seek forgiveness for wanting the very best for you, and a future beyond the blade. Go well, my heart, and she turned to leave again. What of the other Tupper king? Beowulf called after her. The warrior kind. Do they live long too? His mother paused, her back still to him, and seemed to muse on that for a while. It depends on if they can grow old gracefully. Ideally, a warrior king will grow into a gift-giving king and raise up another generation behind him. And those that don't? Beowulf asked. The same as happens to most warriors who grow too old. They die, usually on the point of a spear. She looked round to meet his eyes. Recognizing you are old and that the time of the young has come is one of the great trials that faces anyone, Beowulf. I pray it is a trial that you live to face, with joy in your heart. Don't forget your cloak. With that she was gone, but her words stayed with Beowulf all throughout his journey to the Danelands. 14 warriors Beowulf brought, and as they landed on the shores of Daneland, all of them looked around in curiosity at this new and unfamiliar place. Not Beowulf, though. To him it felt more like coming home than anything else. As he looked up to the hills above the cliffs, he heard the familiar notes of the Sea Warden's horns marking their arrival, and he was pleased to see his father's legacy was still in place. Before long, 3 figures on horseback picked their way down to the beach. 2 rode forward to greet the Geats, 1 held back out of bow range, in case a warning signal was needed. "Greetings, Sea Wardens," Beowulf called. "We are no raiders, and we come in peace." "You'll forgive me, big man," said the lead warden, "but it's hardly common for a raider to announce their intentions honestly, and I see all of you carry arms and armour as if clad for war. What business have you here?" Beowulf grinned broadly. "A wise warden always imagines the worst," he intoned, repeating one of his father's old training maxims. "Indeed they do," the warden agreed. "And who are you who knows our ways so well?" "My name is Beowulf of Geatland," Beowulf declared, the grin still warm on his face. "And I believe it was my father who taught you those ways in the first place." The warden looked shocked and peered at Beowulf more closely. "You're Beowulf, Ecgtheow's son," he exclaimed. "I remember you as a young stripling, darting around with Breca causing mischief." He laughed at the memory. "Goodness, but you've grown. You're almost as tall as a house." "I am Wulfgar of the Wardens. Be welcome. We will guide you to the hall." Beowulf nodded his thanks and signalled his men to follow behind. As they walked, Wulfgar called out behind, "Tell me, how is your father and your good mother?" "My mother is well, and enjoying her home in Geatland," he replied. Then his tone changed as he went on. "My father died some 4 years back," he told Wulfgar. "We still feel his loss." "The loss never fades," Wulfgar agreed. "Only how often we think of it. I'm sorry to hear of your father's death. He was a good man." He signalled to one of the other wardens, who sped off to the hall to inform King Hrothgar of their arrival. So as they approached, the old man was already walking out to greet them, Queen Waltheow by his side. "Young Beowulf!" the king cried out, opening his arms wide. "How good it is to see you here! And look how large you have become. What are they feeding you back in Geatland?" "Uncle!" Beowulf called in return. Then he remembered how his mother had told him to see the court as a grown man and hastily changed tack, bowing deeply and clapping his sword hand to his chest. "My king," he intoned, "thank you for your welcome—" "Oh, pish-posh," the old king interrupted. "We shall have none of that nonsense. I told you you were always welcome here, and welcome you shall be." He beckoned Beowulf forward, and he and his men entered the dark and smoky hall. As he walked inside, Beowulf was once again the 6-year-old boy who had clutched his mother's skirts as he walked in this same hall so long ago. But at the same time, those memories seemed distorted and wrong. For one thing, the hall was small, much smaller than he remembered. Seeing it with adult eyes, what had once seemed vast and towering was now poky and dank. Some things had not changed, though. Dogs still sniffed for scraps, hides still dried in the rafters, and cloying smoke still stung his nostrils. In the shadows, Beowulf could just make out Ashera, the king's closest counsellor, and had he not known better, he would have sworn the man had been standing in that selfsame spot since Beowulf had first arrived there as a boy. "Yes," said Hrothgar, following his gaze. "Here we are, back in the miserable hall of my fathers. What was it you said as a boy? It is smoky and gloomy and smells funny?" Beowulf grinned shamefacedly, embarrassed by the unassuming rudeness of youth. "Oh, don't feel bad, Beowulf," the king consoled. "I asked you for honesty and you gave it to me. Besides, it certainly is all of those things and only getting worse." "Then why are we not in Heorot, uncle?" Beowulf asked. "Why are your warriors not fighting for it still? That is why we have come to reclaim it for you." Hrothgar sagged visibly and stared at Beowulf. Beowulf had thought the man was ancient when he'd arrived a score of years ago, but he realised he'd been viewing it with the eyes of a boy, where a man of 40 summers may seem an old and wizened husk. Seeing him now, though, Beowulf realised Hrothgar truly was old. There was no more gold left in his hair and beard, and his tall, wiry frame had finally begun to stoop. Beside him, Queen Waltheow did not seem to have aged so harshly, but the copper of her hair was now a pure and brilliant white that glowed in the gloom. "I am old, Beowulf," said the king, confirming his thoughts, "and I have seen too many people die for the battles I cannot fight." There was a mournful note to his tone. "I have never been a great warrior, you know this. Instead, I am a king who must ask others to fight, must ask others to die on my behalf. It is a sad reality that many kings must face. But against such an enemy, where weapons cannot harm it, I cannot ask this any longer." He looked around sadly, and his eyes came to rest on the carved model of the great hall, still in its place beside Ashera. "Heorot must remain closed." "But surely any warrior would consider it an honour to fight and die for his people," Beowulf replied. "I remember the strength of the Danes, the courage they bore. Surely a dozen years has not dampened that so completely." He looked around the hall for support, but none came, and he remembered his mother's warning. A fire of indignance rose up in him that no one would stand and support their king. Well, if none shall fight for you, then I shall stand, even if I have to stand alone." "Oh, look," came a voice from the shadows. "A great Gaelland hero come to teach us Danes how it's done." Walking out from the gloom at the edges of the hall came a tall warrior. He was not broad and he did not seem overly muscular, but he had the graceful movements of a man who knew the steps of battle well. It was his eyes, though, that convinced Beowulf he would be a difficult enemy to face. They were cold and ruthless, without any spark of warmth. Beowulf thought he might recognize the man, but he wasn't completely certain. After all, he had been a youth when he left, and a lot can change in 12 years. "Do tell us, Geatlander, who has never so much as laid eyes on Grendel, all the things that we are doing wrong in facing him. I'm sure your opinion holds great merit." His voice dripped with sarcasm. Again, Beowulf looked around the hall to no support, and again he remembered the warning of his mother. With an effort, he banked the flame of outrage inside him and kept a cool head, turning to face the man. "Well, it's hard to claim you're doing anything wrong in facing the monster, as it's difficult to fail at a task you do not undertake in the first place." "Have a care, Beowulf," the king chimed in, a note of warning as he sensed the tone of the room. "Unferth is a thane from an old and noble line in the Danelands." And then Beowulf knew the man. Unferth did indeed have a reputation, and he remembered his father telling him this was not a man to be underestimated. A man who was utterly ruthless and vicious on the battlefield. He had heard, although he could not know for sure, that he was ruthless in other areas as well. Rumours walked with Unferth that he had killed his own brothers so that he might be the sole inheritor of his family's wealth. The man's cold voice brought Beowulf out of his memory. "Indeed, my lord king, thank you for your warning to our guest." He turned back to Beowulf. "We have undertaken the task, Ecgtheow's son," the man replied, his voice still scornful. "What would you have us do? Keep hurling ourselves at this godless creature until all the Danes are destroyed?" "That depends on whether you are equal to this godless creature," Beowulf replied, "or whether you are its brainless foe. If you choose to keep hurling yourselves at the enemy, as you say, repeating the same actions that failed you in the first place, then I imagine the Danes will indeed fail. It is no shame to make an attempt in battle and fail, but to mindlessly keep repeating the same attack, or else give up the attack entirely, well, that is shameful." He paused for a moment and saw some in the crowd nodding silently. He turned back to Unferth. "Then again, Unferth, this creature is of Cain's line, a kinslayer. So perhaps you are equal to it after all." The crowd reacted, and Unferth flushed, but Beowulf's barb had been just oblique enough to avoid being an outright insult, so he fired back a reply, his voice filled with venom. "And what do you know, Ecgtheow's son? I do not know of your great claims of a warrior. In fact, the only tale I know of you is that your vanity tempted you into a swimming race with Breca that almost got you both killed. What heroism is that? You put his life at risk in the open sea, and to make matters worse, I hear you lost. And yet you see fit to lecture us in battle?" Unferth spat on the floor before Beowulf, and another ripple of reaction went through the room as people craned to see his response. Clearly, Beowulf thought, he was being baited for a fight. But his mother's warning still rang in his mind. If he fought against a Dane from a noble family, Hrothgar would be forced to ask him to leave. But if he refused, then Unferth would label him a coward, and no one would support his efforts to kill the beast Grendel. "Tame the fire," he told himself, and a veil of calm descended in his mind. He smiled up at Unferth broadly, and sniffed the air between them theatrically. "Why, Thane Unferth, thank you for that noble offering. Though I believe all it does is confirm to me that you may have had a little too much mead." There was a ripple of gentle laughter throughout the crowd, and Unferth unsuccessfully tried to hide a mead jug behind his back. "And you seem to be missing a little detail on what occurred between Breca and me," Beowulf went on. "We did indeed put our lives at unnecessary risk," he confirmed, and spread his arms out wide in a shrug. "We were boys, and we thought we were immortal. He saw a few wry grins of those who remembered the heady feeling of youthful daring. From his place beside the wall, Ashara let out a little chuckle as he caught the eye of the king, remembering the boys they had once been. For some reason, I can't recall why, we thought it would be both brave and bold to swim out to sea in full armour and with our swords belted and see who could make it back the fastest. As I say, we were boys and foolish boys at that. Over 5 nights we raced each other, but neither of us could win and we always came back together. On the last night, though, we were driven apart by rough seas and Breca was brought back by the coast. I, however, did not fare so fortunately. In the hall, the crowd were now leaning forward to hear his story. In the storm-wrenched sea, I was set upon by monsters of the deep. In the dark, I could not see what the creatures were. Perhaps whales, or perhaps sharks, or maybe great seals or walruses, or some foul demon of the depths, who knows? All I knew was that some manner of creature wanted to end my life that night, but I was not yet done with it. At that point I was glad for the armour I wore and the sword at my hip, even though they weighed me down. Laying about me with the sword, I battled all night with the monsters, as the current dragged me where it would. As dawn broke, it seemed it was not my weird to die that night, and I had killed or wounded 9 of the creatures before, at last, they left me alone. I washed up on the coast, many leagues away, and all the glory given to me was a long journey home, a hiding from my father, and a tongue-lashing from my mother. I still can't say for sure which was worse. He lapsed into silence, scanning the room. I can promise you my steps through the warrior's ways have improved over the years, he told the crowd, and I have won a great reputation amongst my own people, as each of these men I have brought can attest. He gestured to his fellow Gayats, who nodded in agreement. In fact, he went on, if it's proof you're after, then where is Breca? Let us bring him forth, and he can tell us more of the tale. There was a sad silence, and from his seat King Hrothgar spoke up. Breca, I'm afraid, was among the first of the victims of the monster Grendel, the king confirmed. He fought for Heorot and for his people. But the creature's skin cannot be pierced by weapons or fire or poison, and Breca's body, or what was left of it, was found in the aftermath of a slaughter. The silence in the room continued, and Beowulf knew that it was up to him to end it. Well, he began, in memory of my childhood friend, and for the love the people of Daneland have shown to me and my family, and for the dream of Heorot that you still hold in your heart, King Hrothgar, I, Beowulf, Ecgtheow's son, will fight this monster Grendel, and I will do everything within my power to end the beast.
Thanks for listening. Beowulf was a Settle Stories commission written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Story editor was Miriam Sarin. Intro music was Warrior by Hartsman. Outro music was Travel in the Ocean by Monument Music. It was a Parable Arts production.